Hi guys. Today we're going to learn about how to change a radical into an exponent. In our live session, we made our secret compartments. And on our secret compartments, we wrote down all of our rules for exponents that we learned in Algebra 1 class. But at the very end, on the back, the last two things that we wrote down, those were brand new rules that you did not learn in Algebra 1 class. And so that's what we're going to focus on in today's videos. So the last two rules had a base that had a fractional exponent. So we need to know, like, what's a fractional exponent? What does that do? What does that mean? Every type of exponent does something. So what does it mean to have a fraction? And basically, a fractional exponent is basically telling you to take the root. Whatever number is underneath the fraction, the bottom number, the denominator, is telling you what type of root to take. Okay, so remember a regular exponent is telling you like how many times we should multiply something by itself. So a denominator, a fraction, is like undoing that. It's saying let's take the root of it. Here is our first example. So in this problem, I have 64 to the power of 1/2. That is an exponent. That's not saying take half of 64. The answer is not 32. Again, when you have a fractional exponent, the bottom number of the fraction, in this problem, the 2, is telling you to take a root, a radical. The bottom number is the index. So if my denominator is a 2, this is telling me to take a square root, where the index is 2. And so the actual answer to this question is the number 8, because the square root of 64 is 8. Okay, so again, the denominator is telling you to take a radical, and it's telling you the very specific type of radical to take. In this example, the number on top was the number 1, and the number 1 a lot of times can be invisible and doesn't need to be written down. But if you had a number different than 1 for the numerator, a different number on the top, that would be just a regular exponent. Just like if we had a whole number for our exponent. It's just a normal exponent. So whatever your top number is stays an exponent. In this scenario, it was a 1, which doesn't do anything. And then your denominator tells you what type of radical to do. These are the generic ones that we wrote down in our secret compartments, okay? So right here we had a to the, I think I used 1 over m yesterday maybe, but so 1 over n. And then on the inside, we wrote down that that means to take the nth root of a, right? The denominator becomes your index. And then for the very, very last one that we wrote down, we had a to the m over n. So we had a different number than 1 for our numerator. And there's two different ways that you can write that. And it depends, I guess, really on how big the letter M is. So if the letter M is smaller than N, you can write it on the inside. If the letter M is bigger than N, you probably want to write it on the outside. Or if this is like a 2 and this number is a 4, and you're like, I know the square root of 4, write the m on the outside so that you can do the square root first and then you can do your exponent. So different problems, you want to write your exponent in different places. Sometimes it's helpful to write it on the inside. Sometimes it's helpful to write it on the outside. The n is my index. The m stays an exponent. For this video, we're just going to practice working back and forth between fractions and radicals. So here's my first example. This is a fractional exponent, and we want to change it to a radical. So we want to write it in rad form. In our secret compartments yesterday, on the back also, we wrote down a to the negative m. So this is our rule for negative exponents. And a negative exponent takes your base, the normal size number, and flips it upside down, puts it on the bottom of a fraction. So if I have w to the negative 5 over 8, that's going to become 1 over w to the 5 over 8. So the negative exponent creates a fraction. And then my fractional exponent is going to create a radical. So now I can change this into an 8th root of w to the 5th. Now, I chose to put the 5 on the inside this time because 5 is smaller than 8, and so that means I'm not going to have 8 of a kind, so it's okay to put the 5 underneath. So if I want to rewrite this as a radical, it turns into this. Here's another one. Now, this is a decimal. We can't really work with decimals as exponents, so I should change that to a fraction. 0.2 is 2/10, and 2/10 simplified is 1/5. So if I want to write this as a radical, it's going to be the 5th root of w. And since my numerator turned into the number 1, I don't need to write it down. Let's do one more together. This time, I gave you a radical, and I want you to write it as a fractional exponent, so working the other way. To be able to write this as a fractional exponent, we need to know what our index is, because that's what's going to go on the bottom of our fraction. Remember, if a radical does not have an index, there's an invisible 2 there. I know it's normally invisible 1s, but we're not going to take like the 1th root. So this is a square root, so we put a little 2 there. And so whatever your original exponent is going to go on top of the fraction, and whatever your index is will go on the bottom. It's this blue rule, but it's working backwards. Now, I know what 6 divided by 2 is. It is 3. And guys, we've been doing this, right? I told you earlier that you could take this exponent and divide by your index. This is just like the official rule that says why we can divide by the index. Okay, I'd like you to try a couple of these on your own before we finish up this video. So go ahead and pause. And if it's in exponential, write it in radical. And if it's in radical, write it in exponential. All right, let's check and see how you did. So for this first one, it's going to be a 5th root of x squared. And I feel okay putting the exponent on the inside because it's smaller than the denominator. So I know that nobody will escape out of that radical. For my next one, I need to remember that my index is 2. So this is going to turn into x to the 3 over 2. Make sure that your exponents are in smaller and above, especially when they're fractions. When they're fractions, sometimes we accidentally write them too big, and then it looks like a fraction next to the variable. Okay, for my next one, I'm going to do a 9th root of y. And since the numerator is 1, I don't need to write that down. For my final one, I have y, and then my exponent was 7, and my index was 3, so y to the 7 over 3. This concludes our first video.